And then just this past Monday, I was in Dallas with a PS3 operator and did this presentation live with their staff and operating entities that they use. So with that said, I just will walk through this. Andrew at the end will provide the slides. Also, there's a document for an SMS post-maintenance debrief that I've been using and developed. So that'll also be made available to any and all that wish to have access to it and use it. I'm free to provide that both in PDF and Word format should you want to adopt it to your operating manuals. So with that said, the PS3 to me is, your mature flight operations. That's really what I understand. You're in a position now where you have a lot of experience and you can mentor other flight operations, which really in some sense is an expectation. So I won't spend a lot of time, of course, with any of the hazard and risk assessment essentials, but I'll talk in two areas. One, my view on how we look at safety today when you're a mature SMS operator, and then the quality escapes and what that really means. The MRO industry at large has 4 generations in the workforce. If you haven't been in an MRO, I just took my G550 out of a 12-year. So did I have some quality escapes? Yes. Was I pleased with that? No. I think it's difficult to take an aircraft out of a heavy MRO visit today, and if you're not really diligent, you're probably going to experience some quality escapes. Not all have a consequence of failure of catastrophic, but they can be if they're going to affect the principal of the passengers. So I titled this Victim and Enabler in the sense that you have the ability to create a situation where you can enable a quality escape, and just hold that thought for now so you'll get an understanding for that. So my assumptions are, as I just mentioned, safety management systems. I don't need to walk through that. I do believe that everybody here is interested in reducing the possibility of aircraft maintenance, servicing, or handling activity-related failure. It's not just maintenance. I'm going to show you examples of servicing and ground handling where I experienced an AOG in an unusual location. And then avoidance of the following is important to you. Of course, customer service failure consequences. It's not just you're going to have a mechanical disruption on the airplane or a bad event, from an aircraft operation. So I'll go through these slides, and I'm not going to read each one. I should have mentioned that already. We'll talk about them at the end. If you have questions, we can do that. So my session goals: understanding and managing failures, with the thought process being first and the behavior second. As PS3 operators, you're not really, I believe, spending a lot of time just trying to collect a lot of hazards and risk. It's really not about the thought process. So think about what the consequences of failure, what could actually go wrong, and then enact the behavior. We're a little bit different in the beginning if you're stage 1. Well, agreement for the goal of avoiding failure is not analytics of process. It's not. It's not reports and measuring and policies. It's continuous human behavior. That's really what we're going to look for. And especially as we move forward, because we have some behaviors that creep into our operation, especially as we're very mature with SMS. And I've been with SMS since its day in the very early 2000s, I think about 2001. So also to gain probably some consensus that accept the goal and realistic management of risk to an acceptable level, and that we will have losses. Your aircraft are designed and delivered with the expectation of the probability of loss. Now that probability is very, very high. For a top event, it's 1 × 10⁻⁹, so 1 in a billion when they're doing the engineering analysis and development. But yeah, that type of loss is possible. It's, we really can't eliminate everything. So we'll work on that. And then hopefully I can give you some tools to consider. One of them will be that post-maintenance SMS. That is a tool to be used that I hope will check off all the possible, we'll say, quality escapes, at least from the disciplinary area of activity that took place on your airplane. Okay, some safety myths. I like to talk about safety myths first because we're in a very different place with PS3. And some of them really quickly are safety is our business. I don't believe anybody on this call is really where safety is your business. And when I say that, that relates to, are you manufacturing, selling, working in environmental health and safety environment? I don't believe that to be a flight operations responsibility. That's a bit of a myth, and we hear those words. The next one is Safety is ensured by training and equipment. We need to always consider, no, that's not specifically going to be the case either. All right, but some people, hey, I got you the right gear, I got you the right training, we shouldn't have any events, right? Well, that's not going to happen. And then one of my favorite ones, I have a contract with the FAA, an agreement with Transport Canada to teach maintenance program development and management. And of course, when you talk to regulators, a lot of them believe it is safety at any cost. We know it's not safety at any cost. If we just look at the air carrier industry, if that were a case, I would suspect now they'd have a big panel or software up in the galley area that tells you when your seatbelt is buckled and not buckled, so they wouldn't have to worry walking down up and down the aisle. So we have that in our automobiles, but not in aircraft. But is it worthy? So it's not safety at any cost. And then I really like this slide here, suspecting you all can see this. We like safety first. Not really, am I always understanding what that means? We can see the pictures, that's safety first. Well, we see the two men there, and they do have the ladder tied down, and they do have another fellow securing the ladder with his hands. But safety first is very interesting for us to think about and what that really means. You'll see that what I start to consider is a little different approach in what I see, what we're looking to achieve with safety. As we are now PS3, and if you've been around the industry, very experienced, I like to say it's time to be blunt. It's time to look out for your coworker, be blunt about a situation. Don't hold back if you see a consideration or a concern. It truly is that time. I can appreciate sensitivities of feelings and sensitivities of maybe the interaction, but a very mature PS3 flight department, you just call the cards as you see the cards and you respond in that way. So hopefully I'm getting agreement there. It's just time to be blunt. This is an approach that I really consider to be really what we do as a flight operations. I've worked with Eastman Koda Company, I've worked with Bombardier and Charter Management, and we've been around a lot of operations to really conclude that safety is a deliverable. And I want you to hold that, to think that as a thought. Is it a deliverable? Also, to think about your assumptions. And another aspect that we see take place with very mature flight operations, both in technical administration and piloting, is something called training drift. Might not be aware of it, might not even be aware that that takes place in your organization. It certainly does. It affects all of us, especially those, with 10, 15, 20 years of experience. I'm capping out at about 43 years here of experience. Have I experienced training drift, is my personal behavior? Yes. So when we look at what the expectation is, I like to take this approach where you talk about the C-suite and what we're trying to deliver. And there are a lot of philosophies and terms. So I took the process and the time to kind of create what I call the C-suite song here. And it's a collection of words that I found very interesting that seems the letter C in the key of C. There are a lot of words that leadership uses. There's a lot of words that we use as leaders in the industry to demonstrate that these are behaviors or ideas or concepts we should be moving forward with. So those are some of the ideas there. And then in the next bar, we got, of course, some additional words. So I'll go through that. Some of these are very important. Two are going to be very critical to what I'm going to talk about in just a few more minutes. Clarity, communications, collaboration, confidence, all these are important, right? Character, compassion. I'm an aviation idiot. My mom always told me that. So yeah, compassion. I'm very compassionate about what we do, and compliance. We stand on that. That is the pillar to take us to what we like to think of ourselves as being a safe operation, right? That confirmation. But there's some also interesting some C words that can really disrupt this. Now, when I do this in a group, I kind of incentivize everybody to throw out some ideas. But here's some words that don't really help us out when we're trying to send the right message and we're trying to build a culture. So all these cultural words, these are words that can create some chaos for us. And that's one of the words there that really don't get us what we expect out of it. So it's a good idea, I think, sometimes to think about the message that we send and then the message that we send and the words that we use that don't help us out. So when we go through this process, and over time, we identify that we have a risk appetite, and that's really what a lot of this comes down to. And it's both personal risk and your cultural risk in your organization. A lot of times I can go through a little group exercise to help us through that. But I'd like you all to take the time to understand you have a personal risk appetite. So I'm a mountain biker, a single track rider, wakeboarder, a skydiver. Okay, pilot, that's not high risk, right? But my behaviors, some people say, well, that's a risk appetite, Len. That maybe is unlike somebody who rides a motorcycle or somebody who refuses to ride a motorcycle because of the amount of risk, or free climbing. So a couple of things that I like to talk about. One is if we go back as far as Wilbur Wright, a really good quote that I was able to locate, carelessness and overconfidence are usually more dangerous than deliberately accepted risk. That's true. All the activities I take place in and partake in are things I've trained for. I've watched, of course, today we can watch videos. I've practiced to get all the risk out that I can. So I think my personal injury is going to be pretty minimized. There's another one that I've used in my time with leadership responsibilities. I've been VP. I've trained in a leadership role to help assist others develop leadership skills. This is a good one. Just because it's not wrong does not make it right. It's a very interesting conversation when you enter that. And that's a bit about, if you're going to be blunt, it's time to call that out. Do you call this individual out, sitting on the engine? I don't know if he has a fall harness. I don't know. Are you watching out, for your colleagues? Or you're watching out entirely if you're sitting at the FBO? So risk appetite is both personal, but it's also organizationally. I've done a fair amount of auditing over my career. I've been in all kinds of facilities, both the MRO facilities, the flight operations facilities, the just component manufacturing facilities, engineering facilities. Yeah, we have travel rules, right? I think y'all have some, so it's a good time to take a look and say, hey, what are my travel rules? Do we actually have travel rules? And do those travel rules contain a risk that maybe I'm not comfortable with? Maybe that's a risk we haven't all agreed to. So in essence, you have to take some time to think about organizationally from a performance standpoint and safety sensitive and customer delivery. I get to DEF CON 2 and I'll tell you a story I happened with my principal, and it had nothing to do with the aircraft, but everything about the disruption in his personal life, business life. So a lot of times I like to ask this question in a group, what happens when you don't follow a tribal rule? I think many of us know that. The simple word, you can easily be ousted, chastised, made to feel like you're not really part of the group because you're not complying with the tribal rule. This is why I think hiring in diversity and bringing new people in is awesome all the time. Bringing auditors in many cases can help you identify tribal rules. So things to think about in that venue. So as we go along, and we've been at this a long time, and I've seen these behaviors. Hopefully I haven't demonstrated too many of these behaviors, but intellect versus attitude over time, some things happen to us. We're really smart. We're really confident in our behaviors. We've had good experiences, even when we took a risk that probably wasn't an acceptable risk, but we didn't have a bad outcome. So over time, we have a tendency to have some changes in how we look and how we think about things. I was on the flight deck with a very senior captain one time flying on a trip, and ATC is calling him in, and he tells the first officer not to answer the call. And they were providing some instruction, and I was in the engineer seat at the time, and I just didn't understand. So sometimes you can feel you're better than the system. I think that was part of the case. He didn't want to take that instruction at that time and was just holding off. So that's just an example, and I've seen this in the maintenance environment. So we get into that. So a few things happen to us, and the ones that I've been trying to describe first here is this risk appetite. Is your risk appetite the same today when you entered the industry, when you were stage 1, when you were stage 2, when you were stage 3, and now you're PS3, right? So there's a responsibility. So has that changed? And then the word that we all love to talk about, because our operations are almost flawless, right? Almost flawless. We'd say they're flawless. We think they're flawless. And when we kind of start to format our thinking, we end up in this area of complacency. It kind of sets in. It's a conversation I have with my colleagues. It's a conversation I had with those that worked with me in the flight operations, trying to not allow complacency to creep in and then create what we'll call a catastrophic situation, both from a customer service standpoint, from a regulatory compliance standpoint, or from an actual aircraft event, i.e. smoke and hole. So if you recall the little song lyric words I put up there, there are two words that today are really gotten my attention and I like to talk about when I have an opportunity to speak with groups, right? And the first one is communication. Well, that's real simple. We think we're all communicating. We think we're all good communicators. As we go on with time and we have a really high performing environment, in many cases that declines. We think it doesn't, but it does. In a new group and a lot of energy and people are doing their thing and we all understand, we're all learning the SOPs. Well, once we get a little further along in many years, then maybe our communications aren't what they were. So that word is there. The other one is comprehension. This gets us in trouble much more today, I think, than anything, in that we can communicate, but have we actually, is there comprehension to what we're trying to communicate? I always like to make the joke, Dan, I think I run into that pretty much every day with my spouse. So, what I said and what I thought she understood, or what she said and I thought I understood, can always be a slightly different, sometimes grossly different. So these two words I find to be really important to us today, worthy of conversation to understand our communication styles. We have 4 generations in the workforce. I think we are all very aware of the differences in communication styles. And with that should send off a really red flag about comprehension, because texting comprehension is certainly not the same as verbal comprehension. So when you say, I got a couple of examples really quick, I'm just going to show you my personal experience. So you'll see up in the corner, I think I can get rid of this one picture. Yeah, you see in this one, I had a pretty significant event with my aircraft, and it was damaged in a hangar. And it was damaged by, you'll see in the upper left-hand corner and then in the lower left-hand corner, it was damaged by a locker door in a particular hangar at a particular time. It was very, very significant, not just the mechanical damage, but based on the trip that we had to dispatch, and my principal had to depart within about 6 hours. So that was DEFCON 2 for a very large group of people. What was interesting in that you think you communicate and you get all that and the comprehension is there, this can never happen again. Well, back in June, this past June 2025, my captain was in there and took a picture and said, hey, Len, check this out. So he sent me that picture. So there's a disconnect in that of what I would have expected, and maybe the communications and the comprehension weren't aligned, but certainly that cabinet with that door left just swung open, which is what happened when a breeze came in the hangar and damaged my airplane. And then of most recent, I go through a very thorough debrief on my 144-month inspection about the quality of the aircraft, and we really can't have any damage in the aircraft. Please do not deliver me an aircraft with damage. So you're going to see those pictures over there on the right. I have some scratches on my entry floor. I have some scratches on my leading edge. I have some scratches on my antenna penetration areas. And you think, well, you found those during maintenance. No, my airplane was returned to service. So we were out with the flight crew and we're preparing to depart and doing a walk around in that case. And so you find these when I ask the question, are we all done? Yeah, we're done. Well, I don't know that you're really done, because I have these quality escapes, and that's what they are. On the leading edge, they can be significant depending on the depth. But and then, of course, on the floor, my principal is a very specific type of individual. He's very precise about cleanliness, neatness, and no damage to his aircraft. So just a couple of, and that's very current. So a couple of ideas. So when I look today at an organization, this is how I look at the organization. I don't like silos. I'm not a silo guy. I like to think that we have really 4 primary areas. That's what I'm attempting to show in this slide. And in these 4 areas, we would expect that people would communicate, right? And that's my little arrow that's going around in circles. So we're sharing information. So if your scheduler dispatcher looks out the window and probably see something that's not quite right with the tug operations or another aircraft that's approaching, we would certainly think that we can approach that and communicate. And at the same time, we should have comprehension of what we're trying to communicate. So say, hey, make sure you might want to address this. And, so kind of very basic way, address what. And of course, you can always say, repeat back to me. Do you actually understand? That's very common on the flight deck. I'm a pilot, so read back is important. So, but in the center, if you're come to agreement that safety is actually a deliverable, it's part of our agreement and our commitment to our passengers that we've done all that risk and hazard mitigation. We've taken all the steps that are necessary. I don't ever talk to passengers in the terms of hazard and risk. I always talk in the terms of safety, but internally, I think most of you talk in the terms of hazard and risk. And that's really what we're after. So, kind of a visual, where adult learning is very visual. So I kind of like to give this approach where comprehension is, to me, becoming an issue. Maybe it's the 4 generations and the ability to Google and text, but you have to validate that. So when we look at safety as a deliverable, there are 7 attributes to that we're all working on. I'll populate this chart and kind of give you an idea. Well, our very first box is regulatory, right? So we're going to have to say we have to comply with the regulations. That's pretty black and white. And that's all those regulations are really driven to ensure a level of risk that is acceptable at the regulatory level. It doesn't mean ours could be tighter, but at the regulatory level, that means they're accepting a level of risk for the industry at large. We have regulations. And then we take those regulations and we embed those into an operations document. That operations document has a couple of purposes, but one of those purposes is to ensure that hazard and risk have been mitigated to a precise level. And of course, so safety is a deliverable there. We have a just culture policy. I'm suspecting all of you on the call today are familiar with just culture. The essence is that when you have a performance issue, a quality issue, not intentional negligence, an error made, that the consequence, there's no consequence or punitive effect from voicing that, so it's the open door. I have the ability to say, hey, I made a mistake, and not get punitive response from that. So that's just culture, real brief. Training, training's all about our safety deliverable. We have to have the proper training. We get that. Equipment, I've mentioned that already. And yes, we certainly have reporting, assessment, recording. There's no way to know how we're doing and to measure ourselves to say that, if we have a tendency to have one particular activity that's creating more issues, well, we wouldn't know that unless we went through some reporting assessment. And then we like to use industry standards, and that's what ISBEO is. I think you're all familiar with ISBEO, or if you use the MBAA management guide. So we try to take all of these elements and carve out what's important in the right manner to ensure that our safety deliverable is at the same level of risk as our passengers or executives. So I always have to check off to make sure my appetite for risk was in line with my executive officer's risk. Okay. So I put this into this kind of quick format. So those are procedural operations, but then we get into these inhibitors. And the inhibitors are related to, when does that not go right? Well, disinterest, miscommunications, talked about that. Non-compliance, we'll talk a little bit about willful non-compliance. Non-precision, travel rules, risk appetite, training drift, and then segregation, which are silos. So these are behaviors or concepts and ideas that don't allow us to achieve that safety deliverable in the risk envelope that you would like or I would like. Another way to look at it is, so I have this wheel to kind of say, all right, what's this risk appetite and margin? So it's those elements that I mentioned, and you'll see here that you can go right, you just don't know which one you're going to get, non-compliance. And what's the risk appetite for non-compliance? Is that a really small one or a really big one? So that margin can change depending on the consequence of failure. We all accept that, but we always have to know that there's a margin of risk appetite in there, and we have to manage that. And from an organizational standpoint, it should be the same. When it's not the same, we can end up in this, I call it win a destination trip to the island of quality escapes. And when I get to the end of the presentation, I'll explain what life on the island of quality escapes is like. So safety is a deliverable. That's my approach to our industry. It's been that way for quite some time. I've highlighted again assumptions and some training drift to think about, because this is how we create the problem. So as PS3 and the more senior experience, we do have a responsibility to influence others, right? We want to elevate our influence, right? we want to take our experiences and share as much as we possibly can. This slide comes directly from the presentation I built for Bombardier Safety Stand Down and delivered it at least a half a dozen or a dozen times now. But in any case, we get our experiences from a variety of areas, whether real world experiences, book learning, computer, laptop, however you get those. And our goal here is to normalize our industry consistently. Now, we know our industry is a phenomenally safe industry. I don't know if you're aware, but there are about 100,000 flights each year. There are about, 4.3 billion passengers, 40 million 100,000 flights each day, 40 million flights each year. Very, very few fatalities. In 2017, 2023, the commercial industry had no fatal hull losses. That's remarkable. U.S. highways in the U.S. alone, about 43,000 fatalities a year. So our industry is absolutely remarkable. In the business aviation industry, I think I tried to get 2025, but so in 2024, we had 7 fatal accidents. These are global in the business aircraft. And then in 2025, there are 18. I got a note here about 3 in the US. But in any case, feel free to fact check me. You can Google this stuff all day long. But my point is that we're an exceptionally, we'll say, accident-free industry, fatality-free industry. We're the envy of many. But that doesn't mean we stop. So my point is, continue to spread the methods that you use that help you to achieve those remarkable statistics. So when we look at safety as a deliverable, I like to kind of start at the bottom of when it's not and really what happens to us, and that's failure. So we all don't want failure in any venue whatsoever, and so we build these requirements, and these requirements we have to adhere to, whether they're from a regulatory compliance or they're going to be internally from a customer service compliance area. But in this case, I'm going to look at it from a regulatory standpoint globally, because the goal is to achieve compliance with the understanding that if we do that, then our acceptable level of risk is well within the box for the global industry and the regulators. So we go to compliance. So as long as we can state that we're always compliant with what the requirement is, then in that case, we substantiate airworthiness. And that's the way it's done for all aircraft, really under the Chicago Treaty of 1944. So we're going to say, which is, we're going to say is airworthy in this case. So the regulations are built to establish a standard, and the standard gets under the caption of airworthy. So if I'm compliant, I do the work, I can say that I'm airworthy. If I'm airworthy, I can make the statement that I'm safe. I'm safe, meaning that I'm operating within the acceptable level of risk. Hope y'all are getting that and the way that it really works. All of our work is done in the area of compliance. When we're not compliant, it's not a definite you're going to experience a failure, and I'll give you some examples. Sometimes that takes some time, but you have the opportunity for the failure. So elevate your deliverable. I mentioned you're actually going to get this presentation and the SMS debrief, and you can use this presentation for training. All right. So it comes down to 3 elements, right? So perspective, expectations, and choices. This is our life. I talk to my children about this way. You have perspectives on things. We all have a perspective of the industry. We all have these expectations based on our very specific perspectives. And as a consequence of that, we make choices. We make, career choices. We make family choices. We make business choices. So we'll think about those. So I mentioned already a little bit about that we're exceptionally safe commercially, but even the commercial airlines, and I'm going to give you some examples, we're showing up in the media. I was asked to give this presentation because of the amount of media attention that the aerospace industry, specifically in many cases the air carrier industry, is getting publicly in the media, but also business aviation. The military is they're also in the same situation. They're at a 5-year high. I have an article from them. So they're making a significant amount of changes because they're experiencing the same issues with quality escapes and we'll say some bad events, and then of course our private area. So some tools to escape quality escapes. And what does a quality escape actually look like? I always like to ask if anybody's ever had a quality escape on an aircraft. I would venture to bet if I audited your aircraft, every aircraft I audit has a quality escape. You're saying, wow, that's a little crazy. Well, we'll see how we do. So, do they exist in all aircraft? This is things like assembly flaws and physical damage and mistakes. Some of this, you'll see where it comes from: production, maintenance, operations, right? So some of these quality escapes are preventable. Some of them are not preventable. Are any quality escapes acceptable? That's another question I want you to hold for, and put that in the back of your mind and say, is any quality escape acceptable? So when you build an airplane, it's just like this. I like to talk about it's a box of chocolates. Anybody that remembers Forrest Gump, life is like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you get till you open it, see what's inside, right? Well, an aircraft's very similar to that. So quality escapes can come from a few venues. Let this populate itself. Because I like to first go to the engineering. We can have quality escapes in engineering. We're going to show you an example of that. We can have quality escapes as a result of production. Very, very common, just the scratch on the interior protective coatings of the fuselage or the floor structure. Somebody says, well, that's only a 2-inch scratch in the paint, and the base material is exposed. Well, that's important. Why would that be important? Well, you're created two things: an opportunity for corrosion that wasn't there during the development of the scheduled maintenance program. So maybe you don't inspect that enough. You can create a stress line because you're fracturing and creating some manipulation of the surface of the metal, which is going to make a stress point in the aircraft. So those that understand stress analysis know, all right, that's not good. It's going to make the material beneath it have to work harder. Maybe we'll have a crack. So they come from production. There's all kinds. But new aircraft delivery, you have to watch for this. You get them from operations, right? So when we operate in the airplane, we can create the situations with the aircraft. I'll show you one of those where I had a ground handling event, right? So that was a quality escape that, once again, created a situation. My aircraft was AOG in kind of a remote, difficult location to get corrected. Of course, they come from maintenance. I just already showed you a few of those, and engineering. So here we are. An assembly of defects, errors, and mistakes ready for flight, right? We hope not. Airworthy and ready for the mission, mission ready. Those are two different concepts. Mission ready means my passenger services, the connectivity, whatever catering, whatever equipment he wants on board. Yeah, it's mission ready. So when it comes to identifying the fact you have a quality escape, what can you prevent, why you can prevent it, and how? How do we do this? And I want you to strive to elevate your perspectives, expectations, and choices related to aircraft technical preparedness. See what that means. So workforce challenges, as we take a look at some, we do have these workforce challenges. I won't read through all of these. You'll have the presentation. I want to highlight 4 that are very significant to us today. One is 4 generations of the workforce. Then we have a reduced level of technician skills. It's a bit incredible. I went to Chattahoochee Technical School here in Atlanta. One of the conversations was developing a program for tool identification. So that means the technicians that are entering the industry don't know the difference between a cross point, flathead, universal socket, straight, ratchet, inexperience, right? Diminished computer skills, they really rely on their ability to find things through Google. And of course, now we're using, AI. So pick one of those fun AI software, Copilot or whatever. And of course, alternative communication skills. I already mentioned that. On the human performance challenges, work disruption. I don't know how many have a policy related to cell phones, and do you put them in the bin? Do you turn them off? So distraction, stuff like that. But there's a few here also I'll just focus on real quick. One is willful noncompliance. This is when somebody elects not to follow the checklist provided in the AFM. Somebody chooses not to follow the maintenance instruction provided in the AMM. And I think AFM for the flight manual, the aircraft maintenance manual. Complacency, social pressure means it's a bit of a travel rule. We're all doing this, we all move the aircraft, gross example, and we're only using 1 or 2 people and we never have an event. So why would I ever ask for 3? If I ask for 3, I'll be judged on, there must be something wrong with me. Everybody can move it with 2. Impaired judgment, that's an issue. Arrogance over confidence, working from memory and time pressure. So Some quick ones on that. A few other quick quotes. I like this one. What we hope ever to do with these, you may first learn to do with diligence. And this is, I think, my most favorite quote I've ever read. We make our world significant by the courage of our questions and the depth of our answers. This presentation, if you have good questions, and don't be afraid to ask. And my point in the beginning is don't be afraid to be blunt and ask a question, whether it's of your coworker or a supplier. All right, so quality escapes come in three buckets. I like to put them in. They come from manufacturing. I put those in the bucket called defects. They come from deviations. These are errors. That means I didn't follow the particular instruction. I didn't do something correctly, whether I chose to willfully do it or not. These are errors that we make, and they're deviations, usually from a procedural. And then mistakes, unintentional. Maybe the wrong screw was selected. Maybe the wrong screw was put in the parts bin and you got the wrong screw and it didn't work out. There are things that are just simply mistakes. We all make mistakes. We all commit errors, and we have aircraft with defects. But in either case, quality is compromised. It's a quality escape. And we have the potential for failure. This is our circle of opportunity. Okay. So if we look at some situations where what's Len talking about real quick. All right, so here's one I like to reflect upon. You might all recall this. This has to do with MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristic Augmentation System. That was engineered. There's a lot of questions and there are a lot of opinions. It really comes from the type certificate and type design of the aircraft. It's what the finger pointing said that was an engineering deficiency, though that would be a quality escape, right? From engineering, little we could ever do with that. We buy the aircraft, we operate the aircraft in accordance with the AFM and the AMM and all the other document sets, and we expect a good outcome. I think we're all familiar with this one. This is a production quality escape. There's not anything we can do from an operator perspective, so there's no control that we have on either of these. Right? Fortunately, it was non-fatal. We're familiar. It was a break in the production sequence that resulted in, of course, some missing fasteners that allowed the door to depart the aircraft. Really, in the media, all this stuff's in the media. Some of you may not recall this one. This one has to do with fasteners missing. This is an Embraer aircraft. For those that have been around a while, this is a maintenance activity, so it comes from ensuring the aircraft maintenance is compliant, thus the airworthiness certificate. There are 3 certificates. I don't do a deep dive on that, but we do have a type certificate, we have a production certificate, and then we have an airworthiness certificate, of which the only one we can control is in our operating world is the airworthiness certificate. We don't have any authority to manipulate, change, or mismanage those certificates. But in any case, what happened here says, there's no evidence from the morning pre-flight that the flight crew was aware of any of the work performed on the horizontal stabilizer, right? And that's going to be part of my review of this post-maintenance SMS debrief I have. This is the most fatal. Am I okay? That was a little weird. You can still hear me, Andrew?
Yep, you're still good, Len.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. All right, so I believe even now this has the highest loss of souls in our industry. If anybody remembers JAL Flight 123, 550 souls basically. But what's very curious about this quality escape is the quality escape took place in 1978 after a tail strike on the aircraft and then a subsequent repair. The repair wasn't done correctly, and in 1985 it was complete and total loss of the aircraft. Very, very significant, horrific. There's a monument built, if you go visit, if you're in Japan, and so a very sad kind of memento place. And then I think most of us in aviation are familiar with this. This is failure transfer. There are you can do a lot of research and background, but the essence is there was a repair strap that was put on a DC-10. It wasn't compliant. They actually could not find all the records. Definitely a quality escape, not the right material. It departed the aircraft onto the runway. The Concorde had the subsequent takeoff. Hit the tire, tire ran over the titanium strap, failed the tire failed the fuel cell fire failed the aircraft. There's also some records about some missing spacer shim in the landing gear. However, most believe that wasn't the cause of the accident. It's really the rupture of the tire and then the fuel and the fire. So you think, oh, those are significant. This one is one that we can manage at our level. The other one's very difficult. Some might be familiar. Okay, this one talks about a new aircraft delivery. It's a brand new Cessna, right? 510 being delivered. It's going to be a foreign registered aircraft, so the registration numbers are painted on the lower part of the wing. However, while the aircraft's operating in the U.S., the transfer hadn't taken place, so the registration hasn't changed. So someone said, we need to go cover up the registration numbers, which exactly is what the paint representatives did. They went out and covered the registration numbers on the bottom of the wing. However, they covered the fuel cell vent opening. So as fuel would be consumed out of the wing and air would replace that missing fuel, that was inhibited by the fact that it was blocked by a large piece of vinyl to cover over the registration numbers. The flight crew in this case certainly didn't complete their pre-flight walk around to ensure all plugs and drains were operable and not plugged in any manner. So fortunately, there was damage to the aircraft. They had to do an off-field landing of the airplane. The crew did survive. The aircraft was nearly destroyed, basically a full rebuild. So an idea. So they come in many ways, these quality escapes. Some people would look at this. This was in the media a few years back and say, oh, that's a maintenance misadventure. That's not a maintenance misadventure. That was manufacturing. The panel wasn't properly installed from the production certificate. Fortunately, that wasn't catastrophic. So let's bring it down to the real world, which is our world today. Some of those, we hope never to experience, but these are actual experiences that I've had within the last 5 years. This is my G550 wing, and you'll notice here that my spoiler board has lifted up and is lifting off the wing access panel for inspection on the trailing edge of the wing. Now, we've been flying this airplane for many years. We depart maintenance. It takes a few trips, and my crew on the walk around identifies that the panel is damaged and becoming cracked in that location. So of course we're AOG, we got to deal with the situation, and I get the note in here, grip size matters. The MRO did not use the proper grip length in that removable wing access panel. What should have been a shorter length, the -4, they installed the -5, which is a longer length, so it didn't allow for proper tension on the upper panel and allowed it to drift up with the air pressure until the spoiler board got it and then was lifting them up. I say, well, yeah, that's significant, the cost of repair, but what was really difficult was the location that we were in when my flight crew identified it. Here's one on a walk around that I found on an aircraft delivery. The aircraft engines have been recently overhauled. There's that word, major shop visit. It's probably had at least 3 levels of quality assurance, but on my walk around, I identify one of the band clamps as being improperly safetied. That makes it unairworthy. Could it fly like that, for 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 hours? I have no idea, but it's unairworthy. The risk is unacceptable. If the clamp becomes loose and the air pressure going through that duct causes that coupling to depart, then that could be a really bad day. Here I have this one where this is an inlet cowl. It's a fastener on my inlet cowl. And the individual, whomever was doing the work, determined he couldn't put the screw in, or she couldn't put the screw in properly. So we would just go ahead and drill a new hole and tap it. Definitely a quality escape. Don't know if it would have ever failed, but it did cost me about $10,000 once that quality defect was identified. Certainly not acceptable. I didn't ask the question, can't we just leave it the way it is? It's not airworthy. It's not compliant. This is on a 7X that I operated for quite a few years. I had a compressor temp sensor. You're going to get your amber message there, cautionary message. So my crew would get Matt. We did a tremendous amount of troubleshooting, wringing wires out, swapping parts, putting new parts in. None of that solved the problem. Took the aircraft back to the manufacturer in this case and said, we can't acceptably fly this aircraft any longer. It is intermittent. They go through and they do the inspection, and here we have the cause of the failure. And interesting, it's called a high intensity radiated field failure. It wasn't physical connection on the wires, but the shielding was broken down enough to, with the right combination of power transitions through the wire harness, cause the CAS message to display. Okay. Then we have, of course, over in the left hand, I got a dent in this combustor housing area. So no, that's not acceptable. It's not airworthy. And my other AOG remote situation, which created a lot of havoc, is this ground handling damage, and that the squat switch and the nose gear was damaged by ground handling and towing of the aircraft. My flight crew, it's generally visible. It's not really hard for those that are familiar with the G5 type airplane, but that damage in the housing created intermittency in my nose wheel steering on the aircraft, and eventually, of course, it failed in AOG. Quality escapes, every one of these, a quality escape. Fortunately, I haven't had to deal with anything catastrophic. You walk away. So quality escapes, many entry points. I tried to make that point. The consequence of failure are random. That's not the goal here. To me, no quality escape is acceptable. I'm not going to make an assessment. Well, that's okay. We just don't do that in aviation. So those failure modes impact, safety, economics, operations, and passengers. We get all of that. So I hope I didn't scare you too bad. But I want to talk about some of the mitigation that we do in industry from an engineering standpoint, production, and that we try to achieve in maintenance and daily operations. So you should have confidence in aircraft failure. You should, management. The industry, when they are engineering standpoint, we work to, it's called functional hazard analysis. We have failure modes effects analysis. We analyze, and the industry analyzes every failure possible to help mitigate that. I'm an industry steering committee chairperson for maintenance program development. That's what I teach the FAA, Transport Canada, Delta, FedEx, Southwest, pick somebody. I think we've trained over a few thousand people. But let's see what happens to us. These 4 targets represent our management opportunities for elimination of quality escapes. Right? Won't read through all of them, but I'm going to focus on regulatory and operational. Okay, failures come in 3 flavors: active, latent, hidden, and potential. They're induced by, I mentioned this already, you can see those 3 there, design, manufacturing. The ones that we have impact are, we're going to say, operations and human activity. We'll populate this. So there are quality management processes in place to identify these quality escapes and hopefully eliminate the opportunity for failure. From the type certificate standpoint, engineering, manufacturing, this is all type certificate. There are audits, and there are manufacturing district offices, aircraft evaluation divisions. They conduct audits with their service bulletins, airworthiness directives, all this to constantly improve the product. This is what's made our industry so safe. If I come over on this side and I look from the operational standpoint, that's us. We take the aircraft out and we're operating it. I can bring my aircraft to the original aircraft manufacturer, type certificate holder. Yeah, they have audits. They have rigidity. They have requirements. Out of those audits can come, once again, airworthiness directives and procedural changes in the instructions for continued airworthiness, the flight operations manual, pick a manual. If I use a certified MRO repair station, once again, they have audits that's required. Those also can produce airworthiness directives and procedural change. If I'm a certified operator, meaning commercial operator, 121, 135, U.S. commercial, EASA commercial type operator, they can result once again in the same procedural changes. What's very interesting, I find now, and why I highlighted this, as a certified individual, if I work on an aircraft or you hire any technician to work on the aircraft, there's no audit procedure in the industry for that. So we like to look at what we do here at IBEC and ISPEO to institute some procedural requirements. But always be aware, if you contract an independent technician, or if you're using a smaller environment that doesn't have a repair station that has recurring auditing, then you're exposed to the possibility that they could induce a quality escape, and that will stay within the organization forever as a tribal rule, maybe, because there's no auditing requirement. That's what I'm trying to say with that. I did want to point out really quick from an aircraft standpoint to be confident that for the bulk of aircraft components installed in the aircraft, their failure is random. It's basically 90% means, and that really means there's no effective scheduled maintenance. And every time a component is changed, we introduce something called infant mortality right here. So when you come out of a heavy maintenance visit and they change both air data computers, I'd really be paying attention to my air data information. Infant mortality is highly probable if you replace those air data or any component, anything that's a complex component, hydromechanical, hydroelectrical, hydromechanical, electrical. All right. Okay, aircraft defect types. I've talked about some of these already. The ones that we have control in, we experience that we would expect to manage at our level, the operating level. Our operational flight damage, that means the flight crew on its walk-arounds before, after, is identifying external damage. You do a very detailed inspection each time. We manage suspect unapproved parts. We do that by really validating the certification. That's our methodology and proper certifications. Once again, we take confidence that the work in front of that is correct. Foreign object damage, the same, very, very similar operational flight damage, and that if you had some debris on the runway, I recently had this, as it goes back about 8 months ago. So my guess is it was a flashlight in the inlet, and it wasn't noticed by the flight crew, and actually the damage wasn't noticed by vibration indication on the flight deck. There was no performance indication, except the maintenance technician caught the fact that there was a damaged blade. There's a pretty decent sized dent in the blade. So very good engine didn't show up. I was surprised. And of course, ramp and hangar damage, operational neglect induced. I just showed you one of those that has to do with my squat switch where somebody hit it with the tow bar, basically. That's my assumption. I wasn't there. So errors and mistakes. So these are some of the things we see. Improper installation, talked about design. Servicing. Yeah, you can use the wrong materials. We know that happens. Maintenance is incomplete. Tooling, non-compliance, and operational negligence. You either knew it, you didn't, you chose not to do it. Maybe you didn't take the time to read the proper aircraft flight manual supplement, so it became kind of a negligent situation when the system failed. Okay, there are rigorous layers of prevention. My goal is not to walk through all of these, but to tell you in engineering design analysis, it's rigorous. There's some more there. Let's see. I don't know if there's any standard operating procedures. All this stuff comes from the manufacturer. All this stuff is very rigorous. So our expectations of failure of an aircraft out of engineering, design, and production is very, very low expectation of a quality escape, as it should be. Okay. So some mitigation tools that they use in design also is this damage tolerance, functional preservation, crew awareness. They're working very hard to give the flight crew the right amount of awareness for system failures when it's necessary. That's why we don't have as many faults and alerts being posted up as if you go back in some of the other aircraft. And all of that's to lower the workload. So I want to talk about these important manuals. So the aircraft flight manual is probably the most important manual that we all use from an operating standpoint. We don't have the ability to deviate. That's an approved manual. You can't deviate if the flight manual, the flight checklist is in a prescribed order with prescribed details. We can't choose not to follow that flight manual. I think most of us remember the really horrific accident back in Bedford, Mass. Quite a few years ago, and departing with a gust lock in the aircraft. We have operating manuals. The other manual that's important, of course, is your weight and balance manual. And that's also an approved manual. Then we have crew alerting systems and placards and warnings. Those are important to us. Another one, other areas that schedule maintenance. All this is provided to us by the type certificate holder. This is just a slide that talks about MSG-3 aircraft. I'm an enormous proponent of MSG-3. It's the most risk mitigated scheduled maintenance program you could ever imagine. I know the workload. I participate in the workload. Been doing MSG-3 since about 1994. We are the group that removed the requirement for hydrostatic testing pressure cylinders to reduce the amount of maintenance intrusion and the opportunity for failure, because the task wasn't applicable and effective and not relevant to an aircraft part. A cylinder in an aircraft is an aircraft part. It's not controlled by the Department of Transportation in the U.S. So quality escape, sorry, failure management. I think I covered most of this. Make this point one more time. Maintenance ICA activities do not institute failure management methodologies. We have not figured out how to do that. Choices and risks. So what do you get to choose? Am I doing on time? Yeah, we're good. So now we're into the choices. We talked about your perceptions. I've talked about some expectations. I want to talk about some choices we get to make, hopefully to mitigate some of this stuff. First is to understand that your risk appetite is aligned. I'm believing we've reached that point. I've done an audit where that very significant flight operation, and the flight operations risk appetite was quite different than the CEO's after our conversation. Can you create a situation with an industry professional that could result in a quality escape? I typically ask that question. I typically get hands raised. You can do that. Time pressure is usually the creator. Putting too much pressure on the workforce can certainly result in a quality escape. Things that you should consider and decide whether you accept these or not. Do you enable a quality escape by accepting these workforce standards? Lack of knowledge, training, and skills. Complacency attitudes, you accept that. Chaotic environments. Choose your MRO wisely. I have a slide on that. They're very chaotic right now. They're understaffed and overpopulated with aircraft. Willful noncompliance. I would suspect we never accept that, meaning that they have all the proper documentation when they're doing the work, or proper documentation to operate the aircraft or the system. Applying or transfer behavioral stress, I just mentioned that. Applying excessive time pressure and lack of a just culture. Accepting any of those is something I think we all focus on not doing, and things we talk about with our colleagues and friends. You don't want to be that negative influence. All right. The most common maintenance errors, real quick here, not following the maintenance instructions. I have a very interesting question when I talk to maintenance people about, have they ever followed every instruction? Not often do I get a hand raised for that one. Non-compliance with the design, that means altering something, putting the wrong part, or putting something in that isn't part of the type design. I call it creative maintenance, create process, poor quality, improper tool. Did an audit on a helicopter, resulted in complete grounding of the fleet. I think that was about 54 helicopters because of not properly using the proper torque wrench to torque a fastener in the combining box in the helicopters. They had a really bad event, and of course that was wrong tool, and created a significant issue. Use of unapproved expired materials and use of suspect unapproved parts. Those are common. Most common quality escapes, I think, as flight crew members, when you talk to your staff, that cockpit quality configuration is probably number one on my list. Maintenance people know nothing about the cockpit of the aircraft for the most part. They move switches and move parts and move levers and pull circuit breakers. They do all those things. The same thing with, depends on some of your caterers, cleaners you let in the airplane. The elements of a system are not properly connected. We have an event of that with an accident. I do a fair amount of expert witness work, and this is one I'm actually working on. So things weren't properly connected and weren't properly checked, and it resulted in total loss of the aircraft. Missing parts, servicing levels are inaccurate, damage, unsecured or missing hardware. I gave you an example of that. Accidental damage to the structure or interior. My scratches is a basic example of that, and of course, foreign object damage. So what are controllable and procedural areas? Things that you can control. This is the post-maintenance SMS debrief, which I'm going to walk through in just a few minutes. Review of your return to service documents. There should be a process for that to ensure that all the documentation meets the regulatory compliance requirements. Someone should do that. There should be a standard maintenance release environment. So when you're looking to return the aircraft to service, I call a maintenance release. You need to decide what your boundaries are for weather and seasonal, time of day, evening, stuff like that. Whether or not you want to do a flight check, very, very few aircraft today require any regulatory flight check for compliance purposes. That's a decision you get to make, and it's based on the scope of maintenance, the intrusion of maintenance, and conditions and requirements. And then after, you get to have the choice after a few flights or after the first flight to do an open panel examination of the maintenance areas. This is an area that I always focused on, had my team focus on. After a few flights, I'm not talking about taking off fasteners and sealing. It's all the service panels and a good physical inspection of the aircraft. Some quality escapes take a little bit of time to show themselves. From the aircraft delivery process, my focus and what I'm going to do this document is how precise are you today on following the aircraft flight manual precisely. I've watched flight crews deliver aircraft out of maintenance, and if it took them, I'll say 20 to 25 minutes to complete the pre-flight, get the engines and taxi off, I've seen it that fast, and I've seen 1 hour and 2 hour. What has actually been checked? So AFM pre-flight requirements and your walk-around requirements out of maintenance should be tedious and precise. Yeah, I say that to be blunt because, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have to be blunt. You got to do a loose equipment review. They move everything. I was a B tech, A tech, crew chief, lead tech, supervisor, foreman, whatever. Yeah, everything gets moved many times. So if you want an open panel examination, if you do a quick check flight and then have them open, that's also your prerogative. You get to select your MRO. I'll show you a slide on that, and delivery conditions related to the facility, lighting, weather, power sources, FOD surveillance measurements. These are all choices we get to make to eliminate the probability of a quality escape. This slide simply shows you that if you have a lot of full-time in-house maintenance staff, then you have low risk and high control. Every time you outsource, it goes higher. If you're on that single entity or AOG somewhere in the country, somewhere in the planet, you have no other choice but to hire a technician. I've done that, had to do that, but we built a process around it so I can mitigate the risk of that individual making a mistake. So at that time, you've outsourced care, custody, and control. So I'm going to show you these, but I'm going to walk you through in a few minutes the debrief that I have that I'm going to suggest. The question to always ask yourselves in an MRO to try to catch a quality escape is what is or could be different about the aircraft after a maintenance event? That's a big question, and it all depends on the scope of maintenance. Something else I want to mention is you can create your own critical task or RII items. It's usually only required in a commercial environment. Once again, 121, 135 commercial revenue service. But I had such a list in the operations, even though we weren't required to do that. So my landing gear, I might require dual inspection. The MRO may not have any type of dual inspection, but for me, that's significant. So there are certain areas that you might decide when you do maintenance, you tell them that you want dual inspection, right? Same thing, I'm going to show you this in a minute. AFM compliance, detailed pre-flight, I got that. Crew boot up, you should be looking at your CAS system. The fault history should have been cleared, or look at it, then have it cleared, stuff, departure brief. All right, I want to get to this list. It's right here. So for many years, I've been chose to use maintenance debrief format with my flight crews to let them know exactly what took place with the aircraft when they're departing with maintenance. Many times I could not be with the aircraft. There's no technician representative with the aircraft. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But this is a flight crew tool and a flight crew opportunity. And I'll share this, and you can have this both in this format and Word. So it's the objective is to focus the flight crew attention. I'm going to do this thing in real quick. There you go. Let's focus the flight crew attention to specific flight systems and performance and functions. Ensure the consequence of quality escapes are minimized. That's one of the objectives. Increase flight crew attention to the AFM flight manual detail requirements. Ensure flight ready status of the galley cabin lavatory for client trip. And ensure onboard equipment, supplies, and documents are in place. Actually, my flight crew will fill all of this out. They'll put their names, the operator, the MRO representatives will be here. The operator, if there's a maintenance representative's name, will be here. And when it's completed, the captain name and signature. So you walk through the list. They conduct the SMS debrief. You can do this in person. I like to do it in person. You can do it over the phone. You can do it in a meeting similar to this, whether it's a team or GoToMeeting. You ensure your review return to service documents. You've determined weather and maintenance flight release standards. You establish a flight check plan profile for conditions, requirements as appropriate for the scope of maintenance. You decide just how deep. Determine subsequent open panel. Aircraft delivery, check the box here. AFM pre-flight task detail complied with. Cabin system checks complied with. Loose equipment review complied with. Open panel check, access location, right? Establish your delivery conditions, lighting, facility, weather. The captain in this case checks off. I've looked at each one of these line items and I've made a decision, and we're going to move forward. The important part from a technical standpoint, I'm not going to read through all of this, just highlight a few things, but it's these questions that the captain would ask, the flight crew member would ask, very simple. What was the scope of scheduled maintenance? I do this in a table meeting. We sit down and talk, what aircraft structure was repaired and removed, all right? Corrosion, did you have level 1, 2, or 3? Does the flight crew know the difference? And what's important about knowing about level 1, level 2, and level 3? Oh, what operational systems were interfered with? What safety emergency systems had maintenance activity? Fuel tanks open? Was the aircraft placed on jacks? Was a hydraulic mule used? You want to know that, especially from a flight standpoint, contamination of hydraulic fluid, air in the fluid. These things show up, and not during all the ground checks. More technical, what circuit breakers were pulled, if any, any ground engine runs, were those performed? You probably want to know that. I like to know exactly who was in my aircraft and who did what on the flight deck. Did they move the pressurization system from auto to manual? I don't know. I've had that bad experience. Highlighted these, right? Oh, was the cabin connectivity system checked after maintenance? Okay. Were any customer cabin loose items removed? I had a situation, this is a good story to say. So the aircraft was released from maintenance. Everything went very well in the flight. We got back to our operating base, which was remote from where I am and where my high net worth principal was, to find out that his laptop was missing. You may have sawed the wings off of the airplane. He was so upset. He left it in the aircraft. I did recommend my crew remove all loose equipment and items from the cabin. Had to locate what was a high priority sensitive laptop to determine that it was a quality assurance individual that found it in a cabinet and felt it needed to be secured, and put that laptop in the office in his cabinet personally with no record of that. So it's a good question. Was any cabin or loose items removed, right? Let's see. Has the water been leak checked? Have the cabin waste containers been emptied? Had that situation. Probably many in the call had that. Well, the airplane doesn't smell too good. Was a full service check and walk around completed with or without a light check? Interior, exterior, emergency. Good stuff to know, right? When I look at the document set, what's important is, was the content of the AFM changed? This happens frequently. Were any AFM supplements added? It's a good question. If so, are they in the manual, electronic media, iPad? Who updated those? It's always wise, for your maintenance representative to get the AFM supplements. I just went through this before the aircraft departs and send them to the crew so they have time to brief on them. Was the FMS database updated from the weight performance changes? Once again, I go updating a weight and balance manual. That's important to know, right? Equipment list, that should always be updated. That's an approved document from a regulatory standpoint. Oh, any new placards? So there'll be new placards installed if you updated your connectivity system, which I just had to do on my G550. A bunch of other good questions here. Is the aircraft released from maintenance and returned to service? We need to know that everything's done from a MRO standpoint. Anything else we should know about the maintenance? And are the operational databases current? Wouldn't understand sometimes, and I've had this where we get home and find out, the enhanced ground proximity warning database was out of date. Why? Because they didn't ask it. And then a place for comments. So that form, you can be provided if you like. So that's what this is all about, is those questions put into a format. So when we get to the return to service of the aircraft, we got our choices and risk. This is our job. We have one job, right? Bring the aircraft home in perfect condition for continued operation. Recognize high-risk environments and activities. I do this constantly. You look at the MRO, look at the FBO, understand the risks that are being presented to you. A lot of activity today, and it's not business as usual, especially in the MRO business. Manager maintenance release procedures, I try to make that. These are two very criticals. And then you should have a roundtable. I'm a big supporter to identify and discuss possible error chains. When I entered the industry, this was me. I built muscle cars for most of my teenage and early 20s years, and before that it was motorcycles, bicycles, and mini bikes, and whatever else. Today, it's most of the workforce, this is where they come from. Windows 3.1 changed our world, so I'd talk about that. So in kind of a closing point here, there are many entry points for quality escapes. Failures by type design are not expected. There's nothing we can do with those. You're not going to catch that. Failures by maintenance are unexpected with unpredicted outcomes. We need to fix that. I look for them all the time. So some takeaways, I hope, from this time I've been able to talk you through this, and hopefully not too much of a soapbox, is I'm such a proponent of complete a post-maintenance safety management debrief. That's, you ask those questions. And then precisely follow the AFM pre-flight requirements. That's the time. Use mitigation tools and failure management, what you have in your system. We're trying not to be autonomous and talk to everybody when we're conducting aircraft maintenance, and schedulers, dispatchers, cabin, safety attendants, flight attendants, whatever your term is. Use critical thinking approach for each event. Unfortunately, I find today's educational system doesn't really focus on critical thinking too well. Use threat and error management, and be consistently precise. So I don't believe that any quality escapes are acceptable. I put that up as a question for you. I don't know that you don't return to service any aircraft that has one. I try to avoid that. This is a summary really of what I've kind of said are the elements that we use to establish safety as a deliverable. You've seen that. It's the same thing. It's a kind of a wrap up there. I have those. I think we've covered all of that. And I promised one more thing here. So if you get to crash land on the island of quality escapes and you survive, you have 5 minutes to send a message to your colleagues whom will do your job until your return. I've done this exercise quite a few times with my team, and they're going to tell you what's important. So you have 5 minutes to send this message to a colleague whom will do your job until you return. Please ensure that you do this task action to keep your operation running smoothly. You'd be surprised when you ask your people to answer that question in this little exercise. You want them to tell you, and they're going to tell you what they believe is most important to keep your operation operating smoothly and precisely, and it might not be what you would expect them to say. So it's a fun little exercise. A couple of things. These are some great books. You can pull this off of this presentation when you get it. We all know Dr. Tony Kearns and the Blue Threat. Use that in every one of my training. Also in October, I'll be delivering an aircraft maintenance program and education class. It's all about your scheduled maintenance. I'm not here to sell your class, so please don't take it that way. But we're always looking for career development, and recently I've been asked about that. So recap, perspective, expectations, and choices. I've tried to qualify all that as your responsibilities and accountability. And last, to love what you do and feel that it matters. How could anything be more fun? That's what I have there, Andrew.